Great. Nice to meet you.
Yeah,
Oh, I see. So it's just going over what I recorded. I still like right at the beginning.
We haven't recorded anything. No, we haven't recorded anything of any value.
So now we are on. So I just started from the beginning. I just wanted, like I said, I'm so paranoid.
Oh yeah. Well, it's best to get it first time. Best, you know. And how I have experienced this.
Yeah.
I'm now about like in year 10 almost of doing
Wow.
this. Yeah.
And I got some time off, so you know you can catch up and.
Oh, I have no time off. There was no time off.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Have a great one.
Appreciate it. I think we're okay. Oh, there I am.
And
there you are. I hear you, Roland.
You hear?
I can hear you. Okay, well, we're going to just let this go, and I can edit all of this out at the beginning. So,
Sure.
and you've got some notes there. Perfect. So, were these questions helpful?
Yes, they were. As a matter of fact, it got me to putting some things down.
Perfect.
But it was good to get a chance to get what you're after.
Right, and to think about what you're going to say. Right. So that's why, I don't know a whole lot about your career. I know when you and I talked, and we haven't started yet, but, when you and I talked last summer already, that's what I couldn't remember when you left, when you graduated in 1958, and then you came back, and I knew Brendan McDonald had brought you back, but then I couldn't remember what you had done in the meantime, so, I'm interested in that. So I'm interested in everything. So, we don't have a time limit. If it goes, an hour plus, I've
got all the time. I'm retired. And at 83, you don't rush into anything.
Don't rush into anything. Okay, Roland, are you ready?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm gonna introduce everything and we'll get going. Hi, this is Tom Stamen, University Archivist at St. Cloud State University. Today's date is June 24th, 2019, and joining me today for this oral history interview is Roland Fischer. How are you doing today, Roland?
Really good, thank you.
Thank you for coming here and participating in this oral history interview finally. I know we talked about this last summer, and now it is happening. So let's get started, okay?
Sure.
So my first question is, where did you grow up? Where are you from?
Well, I grew up in Alexandria. We came there after the Second World War. We were in the Twin Cities during the Second World War and then came back after the war was over. And I grew up there, went to high school there, and graduated from high school, went off to the University of Iowa in Iowa City. And after a year in Iowa City, I came back to St. Cloud.
Why did your family move up to Alexandria?
Well, my father was a house mover, but during the war there was no moving of anything except war materials, I guess. And so when the war was over, he wanted to get back to his love, his occupation, and so he reestablished his business in Alexandria.
Do you have siblings?
I do. I have one sister who is no longer with us, but that's it.
So you went to a year in Iowa State, and what did you study at Iowa State?
No, there's a difference. You got it's SUI, State University of Iowa. It's like St. Cloud State University. It has. Anyway, my goal was to get into professional theater. That was my goal from high school. From when I was a sophomore in high school, I started being involved in plays and drama, and it became a passion. And I spent my high school career doing a number of things, from building sets to acting to, and it was a calling. I went to the University of Iowa because the University of Iowa, State University of Iowa, in Iowa City was known nationally for its theater department. There were two big universities that were sort of spotlighted in theater, the University of Iowa and Northwestern University, and the two campuses vied for the creativity that takes place in theater, and I thought that was after deciding where I was going to go to school, that of course became either the choice, or the two choices. And so I spent a year in Iowa, had a marvelous time. As a matter of fact, I had too good a time. So I decided that I couldn't continue that. So we came back. I decided we'd come to St. Cloud State, which also had a very good theater department at that time under Ray Peterson, who was known throughout the state as a very fine director, and I had seen productions of his. We came to St. Cloud State to see plays from time to time when I was in high school, and so I was familiar with Stewart Hall and the theater department here. So that's why I came here.
Interesting. So you were a theater major then, and you
Yep.
graduated in what year?
Graduated in 1958. We did some pretty astounding things during that period of time. The Shakespearean Festival, we did a number of rather elaborate productions, and it was known, I think, during that period of time as being a continuation of the Peterson tradition, which had been well grounded. Director Peterson died in an automobile accident in California when he was on sabbatical. So I think the theater department was made up of the newbies and the Peterson group, and so there was a kind of a competition and a kind of a different kind of atmosphere because of the tragedy of Ray Peterson dying, and it was an exciting time.
Do you remember what year he died? I've heard the tragic story. It
would
was
have-
during your time.
Yeah,
that
it would have been. It would have been the first year because he was on sabbatical. Had been. No, I'm not quite sure. I think it was the first year, but it might have been year 2. So that would have been 1956, perhaps, because he was doing a doctorate, I think, and I can't recall what school he was at.
I think it was in Los Angeles. I thought.
Yeah,
that
it was
he
in it's L.A. someplace. So it's curious because while I was at the University of Iowa, I had my first on-stage experience in Iowa in the Crucible, and the Crucible was a wonderful production. It was produced at a time when the Crucible was a pretty strong piece of theater for universities, and Jerry Silberman, who later turned out to be the chocolatier from the chocolate factory, played Proctor, and he was a student at that time. And another person who happened to be a student at the time doing his doctorate was Art Hausman, who is a familiar name to people in St. Cloud. And at the time, he played Danforth, the minister. And when I came here, the first year in 1955-56, a guy by the name of Audley Grossman was director of theater, and he was here to expand the theater department beyond just the Peterson director. They hired him as a second director, and then Peterson, of course, died, and so Audley, who was a very flamboyant, very theatrical, very non-St. Cloud, extravagant guy, but very, very imaginative and really inspiring. And so the second year I was here, which would be 56, 57, in the fall of 56, 57, I arrived on campus, and the rumor was that there was going to be a second director. A new director had been hired, and it turned out to be Art Hausman. And so, what goes around comes around, I guess. And so it was really quite startling to discover that here's this guy from Iowa, and I'm from Iowa too. And so anyway, so it was a pretty exciting time. And Audley Grossman, after the 56, 57, he went on to other things. I don't even know whatever happened to him. But Hausman, of course, stayed, and Hausman and I became very close and very good working relationship in theater. As a matter of fact, he was best man at my wedding, and his wife was matron of honor. So we had an endearing friendship, and out of that friendship grew Theatre L Homme Dieu some time later. But it was a dream that we started in his living room back then, the idea of a summer theater, a summer repertoire theater, and the whole theater concept, along when Keith Michael came on deck, brought another vision to the theater in SCSU, and it grew into Theatre L Homme Dieu and all of the other things that happened after I had left.
Awesome. Now, do you remember some of the productions you were in? I know you mentioned some of the Shakespeare ones.
Well,
can you remember any of them by name?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, one of the first ones that we did when I was first here, 55, 56, Peter Pan, and we did Undine. And for that, Audley Grossman had rented the costumes that were used in the New York production. And so I wore Mel Ferrar's boots.
Wow.
And of course, all the other actors and all the other guys and women had famous labels on their costumes as well. So and that was a grand production because we took the entire stage, including in those days, which is now a storage area behind the stage because of the sound stage. But when it was a stage, it really wasn't a theater stage. It was more of a lecture hall stage. It could be used for concerts too. It had a nice orchestra pit, and it had some other things going for it. So we opened the entire stage all the way to the very back wall into the castle, the Undine Castle, and it was probably one of the first big set shows that we did. And then later we did The Crucible, in which I designed a dual revolving stage, two revolving stages next to each other. So you had two revolves, so you could make scene changes very, very fast, which was rather critical to that show. When it was produced in Iowa City at University of Iowa, they had a revolving stage, and but it was one big revolving stage. But with this curious, the space that was available on Stuart Hall's stage at that time, two revolves next to each other seemed to work pretty well, and it was only used once. Well, it was made to be removed to 24-foot revolving stages next to each other were made to come in half so that the two halves could be stored, because the stage, of course, at that time was used for all kinds of things, and lectures, everything from classroom to to a concert hall, so it had to be very portable. The Shakespeare Festival was done in a summer. It was a summer Shakespearean festival, and we built a interior of a globe. I designed a globe that an interior again that was made to be portable, used only once, but it was meant to be used again and again. And I guess after doing Macbeth that summer, the wind went out of the sails for Shakespeare or something. I don't know, but anyway, that again was converting the Stewart Hall stage into something that looked considerably different than what it looks like most of the time, or looked like at that time most of the time.
Were the theater productions popular on campus? And
extremely popular, yes. As a matter of fact, it drew from the community. There weren't other community theater productions in St. Cloud at that time. The Paramount didn't exist. Actually, the Pioneer, there was some Pioneer work, but it was Pioneer at that time. As a matter of fact, there was I can't remember her name, a professor's wife, that's what it was. She was a wife to a professor here who was very instrumental in developing the Pioneer Theater. Goodrich, I think, was their name.
Oh, it was Herb
Goodrich's wife. And she was a wonderful actress, a character actress. And, of course, they were doing lots of good character shows. They did Importance of Being Earnest and shows of that nature, which, of course, gave her lots of fun. And she was wonderful on stage. She obviously should have been someplace else doing these things because she was so good. So, yeah, it was a very, very active theater time. And on campus, the music department was very strong, and so we did. Suddenly flew out of my head. Wintergreen for President, a musical which had 13 sets in it, as I recall. It was really a crazy play, but it's a very famous play out of the 30s about somebody who runs for president, who then has a baby while they're running for president. So Wintergreen for President, and wonderful show tunes. And we did Oklahoma. I guess I'm grasping here. Oklahoma. The Importance of Being Earnest. I think we did that as well. It was a fun time.
So, as a theater major, were you considering obviously a postgraduate career? And this is, I want to say, it wasn't a teacher's college anymore, but certainly its primary purpose still in the mid to late 50s and onwards for a while was still the training of teachers.
Right.
Was that something, Roland, that you were looking into doing, becoming a drama teacher or a speech teacher at a school somewhere? Or did you have other aspirations at that time?
Well, I think that two things happened. One is that as an undergraduate, I really didn't know where I was going to go, but I knew I needed some time. And so it became quite apparent. Dr. Bob Wick, was my advisor, and I owe him a great deal of thanks for doing some steering. I was the first one in my family that was off to college. My father came from a family of 15, and I think I was number 2 or number 3 of the whole Fischer clan that had ever been to university. And so I really needed the support, and Dr. Wick was very, very supportive. And he and Art Hausman, between the two of them, realized that there was a lot of education needed to take place before I was going to break into professional theater, and so they grounded some hard thinking about it all. So I did a Bachelor of Science so that I could do teaching, so I could spend some time teaching. And that was sort of the plan, is that I would spend some time teaching. And in the fall of 1958, there was a theater conference in Iowa, back at State University of Iowa, and back in Iowa City, a conference, and I had directed Everyman, the medieval play, and created a modern dress version of Everyman, and so we took it to the University of Iowa as a contribution, and all the kids, and we went down to Iowa, and I proposed to my wife down there, whom I had just met in the previous, oh, yeah, that's what I forgot, most important production. St. Joan, Bernard Shaw's St. Joan, I met Rachel, my wife Rachel Humphrey, who played St. Joan, and she was marvelous. She did a fabulous job. And when I directed Everyman, she played in Everyman, and by that time we had got to know each other pretty well. And so I proposed to her in Iowa City, and the rest is history.
We could talk about Rachel later.
Yeah, okay. And so I graduated in December of '58. So I still graduated in '58, but and got a job in Columbia Heights as a fill-in, because I had a double major. I had an art and theater major, and contrary to Dr. Wick's advice, Dr. Wick said, "I don't think that art and theater are a good combination, because they're too much the same, and you wouldn't probably get a job." And it served to be the opposite.
That's a good impression of Bob Wick. Sorry.
Well, I had lots of opportunities to be with Dr. Wick and his lovely wife. Anyway, we with the double major, an art job opened up in Columbia Heights, and I walked right into it right off. As a matter of fact, didn't go through graduation ceremony, went directly to work. But it was an art job, and I liked it very much, but it was a very large grade book. I had all of the kids from 7th through 12th grade, and so I had lots of classes and a lot of very short period classes. It wasn't what I really wanted to do. I wanted to do theater. And a job opened up in Forest Lake, and I went to the interview, and I asked the principal. I didn't have any interview experience, really, because I got the job in Columbia Heights as by default. I remember Dr. Emery said, "There's a job open in Columbia Heights. Would you like to talk to them?" And I said, "Sure." So I went in and to the interview, and they said they had this job, and it's open now. And would I take it if I didn't have to go through graduation? If I could do it right now? I said, "I'll take the job tomorrow if you let me have it." And they said, "Oh, okay, you're it." And so that's how I got my first job. And then the second job, I was a little bit more prepared, but I made the foolish mistake of asking Floyd Cahoos, "Where is Forest Lake?" But anyway, I ended up with the job in Forest Lake, and that was a job that had theater in it and speech, and also some art. I also taught high school art. So it was a good opportunity to explore and expand on the whole area of teaching, of being a teacher. Wasn't too happy with the idea that was what I would do. I thought maybe it might be a little bit more exciting to do something else. And so the with talking to Dr. Wick and Art Hausman, we decided that maybe I should get back and get a master's degree. And if I got my master's degree, then at least it would be optional for MFA or a PhD, and then go down that route, because the idea of professional theater, our first child, our daughter, was born in Forest Lake. We just parenting and being home and being with the family, it started looking like academic theater was a lot more sensible than hopping off with a young family to the East Coast someplace, or the West Coast, or wherever it might take me. So then the academic theater was an option. And all the while we were talking about Theatre L Homme Dieu, or a summer theater, not Theatre L Homme Dieu, because it didn't exist. But Art and I would sit often planning and scheming. And even Bob Wick was involved in those schemes, and Charles Bolser as well. The whole department was involved in it. So I came back for my master's degree in 1961, and Brendan McDonald was my boss. He was assistant registrar, and I worked in the registrar's office registering students for each one of the quarter sessions. And so I got to know Mac pretty well, and Rachel even got to know Vernie very well, because Vernie was in charge of the wives of the guys, and there were quite a number, because one of the things that was unique about being even an undergraduate student we're sitting here in Stewart Hall. I can't imagine how many packs of cigarettes I smoked and how much coffee I drank in this place when it was the cafeteria, and it was where all of us came to meet. And there were a lot of Korean War vets during that period of time, and so there was a freshman atmosphere among the kids that came to university for the first time, so there was the freshmen, the undergraduate, and then there was the graduate people who were undergraduates, but they were adults. I mean, they'd been through a war. And so there were two groups of people who maneuvered around campus, and that was practically the only real variation on the theme of the environment. It was White Cloud. There was a lot of blondes, and I was blonde. I can hardly tell now. I think I've got maybe a strand or two left, but this was a blonde campus, and except for the war vets, except for the vets who had been around. Anyway, so coming back from my master's degree, we did get going with Theatre L Homme Dieu. And it grew very fast. As a matter of fact, when Art Hausman finally managed to get some funding, and got, I think that, trying to remember whether, anyway, the funding came. I was trying to remember the details of that, but probably isn't very important. But it was made it possible to look for a home base, to look for a summer theater site. Brainerd had the summer theater, their summer theater, which was a Quonset hut built in, I think it was in Nisswa. It was between Nisswa and Brainerd. And that theater was for sale, and Art and I hopped up there and had a look at that as a possible theater. And then on a weekend, in talking to my father, my dad said, "Hey, you know, there's a resort with a large cabin, large building, which was their lodge, and then they had cabins as well, but they had a big lodge, and then they had some outlying cabins, and a piece of Lake El Homme Dieu, and he was looking at it possibly as buying it. And he said, well, you should probably take a look at that, because that building, I looked at it, and the building is sound enough, and it's certainly big enough. You could, I mean, it's a bunkhouse, and it's got food facilities. It had been a restaurant, and so we went. I came back, and Art. We went up the next weekend and had a look at it, and pretty much decided that's what it was going to be. And of course Keith Michaels was on board. Keith Michaels was instrumental. Anyway, so Theatre L Homme Dieu was born.
And that opened in, was it 1960 or 1961? I always forget which year.
I think it's 1961. And that was opened with 10 shows in 10 weeks. It was, I don't know, we needed some advice, but we didn't get it. I say we because, of course, Keith Michaels and Art Hausman were running it. I was a student. But I came in as a tech director, as assistant tech director. The tech director was, I forgot his name. He was a new hire at St. Cloud State, as a matter of fact. That he came to the Theatre L Homme Dieu before he actually came on campus. Anyway, so we had 10 shows in 10 weeks. Art Hausman had 2 young daughters, both about the same age as ours. The youngest one was about the same age as our child. And so Rachel became Mama because Kathy was very much involved, along with Keith Michaels' wife. They were very much involved with raising funds and doing the celebrity social thing, and they were and that made the theater work. And of course, because of the Herbergers, Bob Herberger and Cax were very supportive. They had, it's a little piece of the puzzle that I hadn't mentioned, but my best friend when I was in high school was Gary Herberger. And so I knew the Herbergers from probably 1950, 52, 53, maybe 51. So I knew the Herberger family. Spent all the summer, or my summers were spent with Gary and the Herbergers and their speedboat and our water skiing. So when we hit the theater, decided when Art and Keith decided that it would be Alexandria, I got in touch with Herbergers and said, we're going to have a summer theater, and wouldn't you like to be a part of it? And no, they got very excited, and Cax got very excited about it. And, of course, they became tremendous support, along with the Champlins and some other big money people of the Alexandria clan. But after the summer, I decided I wasn't going to do professional theater. It was not my goal anymore. And it was a decision reached by knowing that the lifestyle that we did in that summer theater of 10 shows in 10 weeks was the kind of lifestyle you'd have to be prepared to undertake if you were going to spend very many years developing a career in theater. And I decided that wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want that. So I went back and came back to St. Cloud State and got a degree, master's degree in art. I decided that I had to. As much as I was fascinated and as much as my passions kept saying, this is the thing to do, I decided that wasn't the thing to do. So I switched over to an art major and finished my classes in art and theater. The theater courses were complete, but then I had the art courses to do, so I finished up with the art courses, and we went off to California, where I thought we could meet the real liberal world and people would really understand me. Well, we were in California, in a little town out of Los Angeles, about 40 minutes out of Los Angeles, called Fillmore. A wonderful little village. I suppose maybe 3,000 or 4,000 people, nestled in the middle of orange groves. And we had a lovely house right in the middle of the orange grove, and we had our own orange tree and all that stuff. And along comes the Cuban Missile Crisis in October. And we were just newbies to California, not knowing. I don't think anybody knew or had any idea how outrageous California was at that time. The missile crisis, the fear of this missile crisis was just pervasive. It just destroyed any sense of our wanting to stay in California, because people were responding so strongly. I mean, we couldn't buy any groceries for almost a week after the crisis was over, because there weren't any groceries in California. Everything had been exhausted. You couldn't buy a roll of toilet paper for a month after the thing was over, because it took that long to get the supplies going and get the markets open again, because people just panicked. And the panic was so widespread and so deep that we said, we got to get back to Minnesota. That's where people are sensible. And so we thought, we started looking around for job things, and I contacted Dr. Emery and tried to find out whether there was something available, and nothing was happening, and I got a phone call from a superintendent in Roseville, Dr. Williams, Emmett Williams, and I didn't know who he was. He apparently knew who I was, and he asked me if I was interested in a job at Alexander Ramsey High School, and I said, "Oh, sure, I think that would be really fine." I had a friend who was at one of the old theater buddies from SCSU was at Alexander Ramsey, and I think that's how he got the name. I don't know, but anyway, he said, I would like to have you send me some papers, send me your paperwork, and I'll have a look at it. So I sent him paperwork, and the next week he called back and said, I'll offer you a job. You can come and be in the art department. And it was an art job. It was a straight art job, but I could do sets for name just flew out of my head. Anyway, so I could do sets with him, with my friend who was at Alexander Ramsey, and I did sets and he did directing, and we produced. I guess we did Peter Pan, and we did Kiss Me Kate, and we did some fun shows there too. And I did sets for him, and he directed. We had fun for a while. Sort of like,
well, it's best of both worlds. You're
best
able
of both worlds.
To be able to be behind the scenes a bit in theater as well as art. So
yeah.
Let's roll. If we could just go back to St. Cloud State before we get too far from it. So I'm always interested in what this university was like in the mid to late 1950s. I always describe it as a sleepy teacher's college that was very small, I wouldn't say very small, but it was
3,000 students.
3,000 students probably at the time. So
the whole campus was on one side.
Was
of the
one
street.
side of the street. That's what I always tell people, that it was on one side of the street. So what was your sense of campus life in campus in the late 50s while you were an undergraduate here, and whatever thoughts you have? It's interesting to me it's like it's a whole different world away than what it's like today here.
Well, yeah, definitely different from what it is. Oh, absolutely. But I think that the thing that was remarkable about that period of time is that there were a lot of naive people around, but there were also a lot of savvy people around, and that again probably was controlled by, or at least it contributed by, the Korean War vets, because there was that's probably where SCSU got its reputation for drinking, because that was one of the social outlets for the vets especially. Many of them were here on GI Bill, and they were looking for some meaning in their life after the mess they'd been through. But it was white cloud. There's no doubt about that. I thought that I didn't think it was much different than Alexandria, except at least in those days it was certainly more Catholic than Alexandria. But other than that, there was not much difference. There were lots of kids from small towns. Not very sophisticated. The music department was very strong. The theater department was very strong. The art department was okay. It wasn't very strong because it still was recovering from the fact that it was not developed. They were trying hard to get the art department to come into the real world, into the modern world, because it's kind of strange. The campus had a lot of female faculty. Left over again from the war, from the Second World War. There were a lot of faculty that were off fighting the Second World War. Colonel Cates and Dr. Harris and these guys were all vets from the Second World War and had war tales to tell. As a matter of fact, they did. I remember Dr. Harris's class in that period, talking about that period of time, and we heard war stories after war stories. So the atmosphere on the campus was, the faculty was kind of split between those who wanted to who had aspirations of a different kind of campus, and the faculty that was here that kept the place going while the war was on. So I think that had an influence. But generally speaking, there wasn't any reason for it to be anything other than a kind of quiet place, for a wholesome place. There were some very special people here. Besides Art Hausman, Dr. Wick, Hal Lieberman was a real breath of fresh air, and who didn't come with the military kind of outlook, but was a liberal faculty member.
Still is.
And still is, yeah. Still is, yeah. Hal and I share visits from time to time. We have it. He's just finished his memoir, and I just finished mine, so we have had quite a few conversations about our memoirs. So it was a different place. It was a campus on one side of the street. We had kangaroo courts for freshmen. We had a beanie. We had wholesome place.
A wholesome place, right? Now, foreshadowing a little bit to your roles later on here at St. Cloud State, did you have any interaction with any international students? And probably Brendan McDonald, he must have been, at that point, he had come back after he had graduated, and I don't know what role, if he was in the registrar's office or not, but did you have any inkling about international students or even international travel at that time?
No, not really. As a matter of fact, that wasn't a high priority. I hadn't had a real... At Iowa, I had experiences with international students. The large dormitory that I was in, we had international students, so I was familiar with what a colorful campus could be, and I do remember thinking that St. Cloud needed some of that, and but Brendan was as close as I came to actually getting to know somebody who was an international student. So the international part of our experience came as a result of deciding, after we went to California and were somewhat disillusioned with our plan for our lifestyle at that time, I came back, and then after the Roseville experience in 1968, I resigned from Ramsey and went up north to open a pottery and be a potter. And so I had a pottery, I built a pottery, and we taught our own children. We were homeschooling, and at that time homeschooling was, well, there just weren't very many, and there were people doing it. But we decided we could, because both Rachel and I was I have a lifetime teaching license for K through 14, and Rachel had teaching experience and had been not licensed, but she had been a teacher, and we decided we could teach our own children, and so we opened our own school, and we taught our own children for a year, and then the second year the sheriff came to the door and was going to arrest me for not sending my children to school. And we became the first real test case for Minnesota and the law in Minnesota for homeschooling. And we lost it. We lost the case. And then we won the case on appeal. So we were disillusioned again because we taught our own children. So we decided we'd go to Europe, and we would find a place in Europe, and we would continue our education, because we were now a private school. We had been a certified private school by the state of Minnesota, and so we had the right to be teachers of our own children, and we thought we could go to Europe and do that. And so that was our introduction to internationalism, so to speak.
So what year was that, Roland?
1971. 1971. So we went off to Europe, and we sold everything and packed our bags and ended up in Shannon, Ireland, and looking for a place to live and getting on with our lives. And we spent a year traveling through Europe, teaching. I did some teaching, and looking for a place to live, and decided that isn't going to work. We decided that we couldn't be teachers because that would be, I mean, we couldn't be immigrants because we knew we would never belong. Our kids could, and as long as we had a choice, then we decided we'd come back to the States and see if we can figure out something So we came back and opened a farmer seed nursery. I had had quite a lot of experience in growing things and some business experience, and decided to do that. And we opened the farmer seed nursery in Pequot Lakes, and we continued on with our teaching our kids. Our daughter decided she wanted to go to junior high school, and so we said, well, you can do that, but if you're going to go to junior high school, you have to make a commitment, and you should be very thoughtful about that, because once you've decided to do that, that's what you have to do for a year. We can rekindle it after a year, but you're going to be there for a year. You're not going to go and turn around and come back just because you couldn't get along or whatever. And so she took that on, and she went to junior high school in Pequot Lakes and found good friends, and decided she would really like to do that. And so we did that, and decided at one point that it would be we could go to New Zealand. When we were in Europe, we met some New Zealanders and got to be friends with a doctor, a New Zealand doctor, who was there for a year on what they call a locum, which is substitute doctor, in Beverly on the Hull. And we met them in a campground and got to be good friends quite quickly, and spent a lot of time with them. And at one point they said, well, we're going back home again next year, but if you ever decide to come to New Zealand, let us know, because we'd love to have you come and see us. So, of course, when we were sitting in our business in Pequot Lakes, New Zealand started calling, and so I took a fly drive tour of New Zealand, 2-week tour of New Zealand with tape recorder, maps, and a whole bunch of things, and tried to decide whether we should live in New Zealand or not. So after the 2-week trip, came back. We decided we were going to go to New Zealand, so we put the business up for sale. Sold very quickly, and within a couple of months, we found ourselves in Auckland, New Zealand, and we actually had landed immigrant status. So you couldn't just go there to work. They don't need people to work. They need people if you have a skill. And I had the degrees and licensures and all of that. And the New Zealand government, when I was there, I checked in, and they said, yes, we would definitely be able to come in as a landed immigrant status, and which allowed me to work. So that was part of the research, and it worked out very well. We spent 3 years in New Zealand, loved New Zealand, still love New Zealand. It's a very special place. It would remind you of St. Cloud, 1955. It's a very, very benign, wonderful place with wonderful people. But very quiet. I always think of New Zealand in a kind of a curious way. You know, in America, you find somebody and you've had disagreement with them, and you want to start an argument. You've got to argue about the whole big picture. You have to be prepared to take on all of the potential aspects of the argument. In New Zealand, if you want to start an argument or a discussion and end up in an argument, you do not end up arguing about the big picture. You only argue about a very small corner. That's just a little piece down here. This is what we're going to. They're island people. There's a psychology. There's a way of life that pervades all of the way in which they view the world. And they're very outgoing. They travel at standard. All of our friends in New Zealand, their children have all been to Europe by the time they're 15, 18, 20 years old. They've all done they've all sown their oats elsewhere. So they're very much aware of New Zealand and where it is and how it is and what it is, because it is an island and it's a long ways from almost everything. But they're marvelous people. So after a while, I could not break into the economics because that also is restricted. It's a very closed economic program. I wanted to start a business. I was teaching. I got a job teaching, and Rachel got a job teaching. We were both teaching. Rachel was teaching in a Maori school, so she got to know the real culture, the real New Zealand culture, and got very, very close to the Maori people, which she was not very happy or very excited about leaving. I was teaching in a upper class, high-end girls' school, and that had its consequences as well. But anyway, the point is that we decided after 3 years that we had either better make a commitment and stay here for the rest of our lives, or we better get back, because our daughter was graduating from high school.
Was she in New Zealand, or was she still in Minnesota?
Oh no, they're all the kid. The kids go with us. We've been everywhere. Everywhere we go, they go. Very early on, sort of the family. What could I call it? A legend. Family value was that we have to make decisions now, and they are along for the ride. And when they get old enough to make those decisions, they'll understand why we make them and why they have to be along for the ride. And of course, there were rewards. I mean, when we were in Europe, we sat in the Coliseum because it was open. You could just walk into the Coliseum. We walked into the Coliseum, sat up in the balcony and up in the upper levels, and I went on for a couple of hours on the history of the Coliseum. And we did that all through Europe. Every place we went, we found our kids were part of the reason we were there. And so, anyway, after we left New Zealand, came back here, we started thinking about what we're going to do. And we came back here to try to work out, because our kids were going to be empty nesters before very much longer. And so that meant some decisions about what we wanted to do. And one of the reasons we ended up in China was because both Rachel and I, as children, wanted to go to China. I had a very good friend in Alexandria. My best friend in middle school was his grandparents had lived in China and had been in China for many years as business people, and had left China in, of course, 1949, and were in Alexandria, and they had a house out on Lake Carlos, and their house was a reinvention of China. It had marvelous, marvelous furniture and marvelous smells. I can still smell the smell of their home, because my friend and I would go out there in the summertime, especially. We would go to Grandma's house, and we would listen to Grandma tell us stories about China, and we would practice our chopsticks and picking up raisins and rice and whatever, peanuts and whatever. So it was a kind of very romantic vision of what China was like. So it became sort of my childhood vision, interest, mission, was to someday go to China. And I read The Rickshaw Boy, which is a novel that was very popular in the 40s. It was produced in 1945, so I suppose it was in the 50s, 60s. So in 1945 was a very popular novel in America, and I read it as a middle school student. So I had the China thing in the back of my mind, and we decided that we should probably get to work on that aspect. Rachel's family were St. Cloud people. She grew up in Milwaukee, but her father was taught art at St. Ben's, and he was a silversmith, a very good one too. Made silver objects for the church, for the Catholic Church, ciboriums and chalices and patens and various things that were monstrances, various items, altar items for the Catholic Church. And Rachel grew up with the sound of Sung Ching Ling in the background, talking about the orphans in the Civil War and the Japanese occupation of China. And so China, for her, was a war story. For me, it was a romance. And so she wanted to go to China. As a matter of fact, that's what sort of created our relationship, because just in casual coffee and cigarettes at Stewart Hall cafeteria with these vets, they were talking about things of the world, and of course we were talking of things of the world too, and only our world was quite imaginary and theirs was very real. And so we decided, actually in Iowa City, that we'd be a good couple, right? So we always had this longing to do the Chinese thing, and after coming back from New Zealand, we got to thinking about that, and that's about the time of the Nixon thing. It's in the mid-70s, and the connection, the Chinese connection, and we decided that it would be very exciting to be able to pursue that, because I found an article in the Time magazine that said that they were accepting teachers. They needed English teachers. So we, of course, shot off papers to Beijing to be English teachers. Didn't hear anything, absolutely nothing, for months. So we pretty much had resigned to the fact that that wasn't going to work, that wasn't the way to do it. And coincidentally, a friend of ours was doing a graduate work at the University of Minnesota, and one weekend he came by and he said, "I've got communists living across the hall from me." Really? Yeah, he said, there's 4 Chinese guys live across the hall from me. They're really nice guys. I got to meet them, and they're really interesting. And you talk about China all the time. You want to meet them? Of course, we want to meet them. Well, it turns out that these 4 visiting scholars from China, from Beijing, arrived on the 31st of October, and were put in an apartment in the university housing apartment on the 31st of October. And he was in an apartment across the hall from this place. and realized after tricks and treating a bunch of kids with costumes and makeup and asking for food, he thought those guys probably are a little bit confused by this. And so he knocked on the door and said, you know that's what's going on? I said, no, they were frightened. They had these kids. They came to America. They just got off the airplane in here. These kids are begging for them at their door. And so he explained it all, and they got into it. And that's how he developed this friendship or relationship with these guys. And so he brought them up to our house here in St. Cloud. Rachel was finishing her degree, her master's, bachelor's degree. She was finishing her bachelor's degree, and in English, and we got to be good friends with the four of them, which turned out to be 16 of them, which turned out to be 32 of them, because the University of Minnesota had a relationship with Chinese education, and the University of Wisconsin and the University of Minnesota, two universities nationally that did more for the early relationship with higher ed and education and opening the door in higher ed to China, to Chinese scholars. And so they had lots of visiting scholars from China. Anyway, we got to be good friends with them, these guys, and they were lots of fun. Thanksgiving, Christmas, all the holidays, we would have Chinese friends in, and they would invite us to the University of Minnesota when the University of Minnesota would have films or some Chinese events, and so we went to Spring Festival at the University of Minnesota with these guys. And anyway, over a 2-year period, we got to know them very well. They got to know us very well, and got to know guys who would come and go. And one time, one of them said, "I understand that you would like to teach in China. You'd like to go to China." And we said, "Oh, yeah, that'd be fun." But Beijing never responded to our application. Well, he said, "Maybe you should just send your paperwork to this address, and maybe that's you're just not applying to the right place. It's in Tianjin, and you could do that." So, wow, that's very exciting. So we sent off our paperwork to this place in Tianjin. Then we looked at the map and couldn't find it. There wasn't any Tianjin. There was a Tianjin, but not a Tianjin. And finally we got that sorted out. But anyway, we had applied to Nankai University, which we didn't know from Nankai from St. Cloud. We knew more about St. Cloud than we knew about Nankai. Nankai was probably the third most prestigious university in China of their universities. And we had applied, and nothing happened. And maybe about a couple of months went by, and my friend said, "Well, that's not going to work." And he said, "Well, I don't know. I'll check." So at some time we got together. So he called, and it turned out that he said, "You call this number, this telephone number, book a telephone call to this number." And so I did. Perfectly on the other end was somebody who spoke perfect and good English. And he said, "Would you be really interested in coming? We'd be very interested in having you come, and could you come next week? We have 2 dogs. We have children. We have by that time we had a granddaughter, and I had a house. And I'm here in St. Cloud. My son's here at St. Cloud State. He's So, no, I can't do it next week, but could we make it in 6 weeks? Would 6 weeks work? And they said, yeah, that'll work fine. You can come in 6 weeks. So he said, I'll send you some material right away for your visas and all that stuff that you need to do to fill that out. Get that to us as soon as you can. And you just come. We'll meet you. Let us know where. And 6 weeks later, on the 16th of April, we arrive in Beijing.
What year was that, Roland?
1982.
1982, wow.
Yeah. And that began a very long and wonderful period because that's been our 35 plus years of relationship with higher ed in China, and all the experiences we ended up in China in Nankai University teaching for 5.5 years. During that 5.5 year period, on occasion I would come back and talk to Mac and Keith Rausch and Dr. Wick and all kinds of good people here who were curious about Minnesota, about China, and
so it begins, right?
So it begins, yeah, and it just tumbles. Art Hausman had long since left. He was in South Carolina. So we didn't see him again. Never did see him again after we left. Well, actually, at the end of Theatre L Homme Dieu, that first year, and I switched over into art major. Then we didn't see very much of Art and Kathy. But the Chinese years with Mac was very interested in China. He said there's a whole world there that we've got to explore as academics. We just need to be involved in that. And so he was.
So and Mac was president at that time from 1982 to 1992,
yeah, to 92, yeah. And because I did theater, and I was teaching English, but my job was focused around using theater as the vehicle for teaching English. So I had courses in history of theater, and then in 1985 I did Oklahoma, a production of Oklahoma with Chinese kids wearing holsters and cowboy hats and singing Oklahoma. And it was a wonderful production. It drew all over town. All the foreigners came. The audience was half foreigners and half Chinese. The foreigners were laughing, and the Chinese were looking at them, trying to figure out what they were laughing at, and vice versa, because the Chinese would laugh, and it was sort of the cross culture magnified. Anyway, we did Oklahoma, and then I decided to do a play by a famous Chinese playwright who was a graduate from Nankai University. And this play had been first performed at Nankai. And so I decided to revitalize the theater program at Nankai. Nankai had a famous theater program because in the 1920s, 1930s, 1920s and 1930s, Western influence, particularly in the arts, was very heavily influenced in China. We had no idea. China was being influenced here because in the 20s and 30s, there was a lot of Chinese stuff here. I mean, we were doing Chinese cloisonné vases and all that stuff. All you have to do is look at Antique Roadshow, and there's lots of Chinese antiquities that appear on the roadshow, because there was a lot of it being brought into this country, both Japanese and Chinese. But we were unaware of how influential American theater was in China. And that of course, their traditional theater, Peking opera, etc., but how much of an influence the kind of drama that American theater produced, in the way of musicals and in the way of serious productions, dramatic productions, and the theater sets and so on. So I got permission from the president of Nankai to do Cao Yu's Thunderstorm, and so that next fall of '86, I thought I would do that production. So when I was back here for the summer, our summer vacation was 5 weeks long, and so we came back for 5 weeks to see our families and so on. And that was part of the contract. The contract provided airfare for if you spent 1 year, you got a round trip airfare. So we would come back here for the summer, and I sat with Mac and said, I'm doing this Chinese play, and we would talk about that, and I said, I'd like to tour it, and I'd like to bring it to America. And he lit up. He said, now there's a challenge. I said, yes, you bet there's a challenge. The whole idea of getting visas in 1985 for Chinese to come to America just after Reagan had the tennis player who had abandoned ship was a real challenge. And he said, but if you can get the show together, and if you get permission to do it, I'll host it. And so that started the cultural exchange program that we did. And so we did come in 1986, this February of '86, with Thunderstorm to St. Cloud State. And it's the first time. No one has yet found another example of university students, Chinese university students, performing in the U.S. a Chinese play in English. And so we did the Minnesota tour, University of Minnesota, Duluth, Bemidji, Moorhead, Southwest, Mankato, Winona, Anoka-Ramsey. There were 9 stops in Minnesota and Stanford University in California. Performed the play, and it was a wonderful experience for the kids. It was a wonderful experience for me. It was really great. And the University of Minnesota China Center offered and wanted me to bring another play next year, the second year. And Stanford University wanted to host a tour of a play. They'd probably bring another play. So we were caught between creating another show, and whether it would be Stanford or the University of Minnesota that would host it, we weren't sure. That would have to be a decision that the president of Nankai University would have to, let him do that, make that decision. Nankai had a long relationship with University of Minnesota, one of the very early ones. And the University of Minnesota had treated Nankai very well. And so had Stanford, and so had Berkeley, and they had a very strong relationship with Berkeley. But anyway, the point is that we ended up with doing the Rickshaw Boy. Rachel and I wrote a script, took the novel and made it into a play, and then brought 2 rickshaws and 10 students and presented the Rickshaw Boy to a 3,000-mile trip. Basically, Big Ten schools. The University of Minnesota was a host, and they hosted the play, and they made the arrangements to be able to present University of Chicago, University of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Madison, University of Madison, someplace in Detroit, and then Indiana, Illinois, Kansas, Kentucky, Iowa, Minnesota. So it was a big, took 6 weeks, 5 weeks, 5.5 weeks to do the trip, and we toured them in a bus. We had our own coach, and we went from campus to campus presenting this play. And after discussions with Nankai about St. Cloud State, they wanted St. Cloud State to send them something. And so talked to Dale Swanson and Mac, and we decided to do that. The Wizard of Oz would be fun to do. And so the Wizard of Oz came to Nankai after we got back there. We were back in March, and from the tour of Rickshaw Boy and The Wizard of Oz came in April, I believe, and they did a 6-campus tour and ended up in the Shanghai School of Drama doing The Wizard of Oz. So SCSU had a foothold in overseas touring theater department with A Wizard of Oz.
So how was this sort of setting the ground for you to come back to St. Cloud State? How was this? So just seeing the success of these tours and having conversations with President McDonald, was this sort of setting the stage for you to return to St. Cloud State and to begin your roles in international studies?
Well, yes and no. Actually, Rachel and I were at the crossroads of making a decision whether we were going to spend the rest of our lives in China, the rest of our working lives in China. That we were so well received, and we were received. I mean, we had such a marvelous relationship going, and a future really of not necessarily touring Chinese plays wherever willy-nilly, whether it be Europe or wherever, but more important would be developing a theater program at Nankai. Hopefully, that we had already revitalized it. It had already taken one giant step forward from a long vacation through the ending of the Second World War, and then all through the Cultural Revolution and all of that. I mean, there was nothing happened from basically at Nankai, nothing happened from 1939, when the Japanese occupied China. That's another story, incidentally. I got stories, I tell you. I got stories. This one, I got to tell you this one. This is, in 1939, the Japanese declared that either China surrender or they were going to bomb Nankai. That'll give you some idea of the prestige factor in Tianjin. Tianjin is 60 miles from Beijing. It's the gateway to Beijing. Everything that happens in Beijing happens in Tianjin first, because that's the seaport, and because it's the end of the Grand Canal. So everything coming from Shanghai up to Beijing has to end up in Tianjin, and everything goes from Tianjin. So you can imagine the commerce, the influence of political, economic, social influence that Tianjin had. Plus, Tianjin was much more, it was a much nicer place than Beijing, because Beijing was a capital city, but it was a kind of industrial city. Well, Tianjin was a cultural city. It had a wonderful music conservatory. They had arts. They had museums. They had many churches. They had French Catholic Church. They had a synagogue. They had all these things, remnants of the colonial period, and all these canals, which were waterways weaving their way through the city to facilitate the Grand Canal, and also because it's only 6 feet above sea level, so and the sea breezes and all that make it a very attractive city. So the people who were in Beijing, even the diplomats, all went to Tianjin for their holidays, because it was 60 miles up the road. Where was I going with that?
Talking about the Japanese.
And the Japanese said, and the Chinese said they didn't believe them. So they dropped bombs on Nankai, and they surrendered. Mm-hmm. And the Japanese came to Tianjin and up the road to Beijing, and occupied from 1939. Nankai, at the point of the bombing, they decided they had to get out of there, the academics. So they packed up the university. They packed up about 1,500 students and walked to Kunming, 1,300 miles away, with the university on their backs, with some of the books, of the important things, documents, etc., and ended up in Kunming, because Kunming had a mountain range between the north and the south, and they were in a unique position. That's the home base of the Flying Tigers. The whole story, all the legends about flying tigers and the airplanes with tigers painted on them, and so Nankai, Beijing, and Tsinghua, which was the other. These were the 3 major universities in China, the big puppies. Formed a tri-campus community in Kunming to keep the universities going, keep Beijing University, Tsinghua University, and Nankai alive from 1939 to 1945. Anyway, so that's a story about Nankai.
So you and your wife were at a crossroads.
We were at the crossroads of trying to decide whether we were going to stay. I'm 55. I'm actually retirement age. I could have retired at 55, but as a foreigner, they would let me keep 1 year. So we thought we were going to be probably 8 or 10 years. And the idea of trying to make that decision came to the point in which, at one point when Don Sinking called me in Tianjin and said, "We're talking." He was the dean of humanities at SCSU at that point, and he said, "We were talking about you, and would you consider coming and spending a year, or would you consider coming and being the student, international student director and I said, well, that's curious, because that's what we're talking about here too. We're trying to figure out what we can do, because we were faced with no Social Security. We didn't take any Social Security out when we were in New Zealand. Didn't take any out when we were in China. And so now we've got to decide at some point that if we're going home, which we plan to do, we are going to be broke, and no plan. And so I said yes, I'd be real happy, but it's only for 1 year. He said, well, that isn't exactly what we had in mind, but yeah, okay. So we came back for a year, during which time we were going to make our decision as to what we were going to do.
So that was 1987 that you came back?
1987, fall of 1987. President Mu at Nankai, when I informed him, he said, what's a sabbatical? I said, well, a sabbatical is just a leave. And he said, okay, but what is it called, a sabbatical? It's called a sabbatical, isn't it? Well, because that means you're going to come back. Oh, I said, okay, then I'm for sure. Yeah, you have a sabbatical at Nankai. They said, usually that means you get paid too. Oh, that's not a sabbatical. That's not the Chinese sabbatical. We don't have those. We don't have a Chinese sabbatical. So anyway, I said that didn't matter. The idea was that we could come back, have our house back and our apartment back, and so coming here, the first 3 months, we were determined that we were going to go back. The lifestyle here was too crazy. There were too many people running around. I don't know. There were it just wasn't, it didn't fit very well. But I liked the job. I really liked the job. The kids were really great, and actually being among so many people that I knew and friends, that was, one of the curious things that happens to you. I suppose vets feel this if they're assigned to Germany or wherever, someplace in the world. One of the things about being in one place and being a part of one place is that you belong there. We didn't belong here, in spite of the fact that we knew this place very familiar. We're familiar with it. But time went on, and of course, the granddaughter and family, and my mother needed help. Rachel's mother needed help. So they were widows, and then the job was so good. I really just loved the job.
So what were your duties? What did you do with that job then? What was the thinking? Was President McDonald like, we need to get more international students here, we need to do more study abroad? What was, obviously he had a reason why that you came back. So what did you do?
Well, it was quite clear that my job was international students, and all he had to do was look to the south. He saw Mankato and what they were doing. And Mankato was doing a lot of stuff that SCSU wasn't doing. The position was a part-time position at that point. The International Central for International Studies position was a full-time position. That was suddenly I forgot his name. Anyway, he was fired, partly because he went to China with Mac and Mac. I don't know if he was fired. He went on to better things, but he really screwed up the trip to China, in which Mac came to St. Cloud. Mac came with Don Sinkik and the business director, whatever his name. There were 5 or 6.
Like Radovich, one of them.
No, Radovich wasn't in that one.
It wasn't in that yet.
Radovich, no. But there were 5 or 6, and one of them was from Moorhead.
Oh, I see.
A delegation, and they were going to Jinan University, where they were going, and Xi'an, where they were going to send students, and they had already sent one batch of students there. One group of students had been to there. to Jinan, and their second group was going to go to Jinan in Xi'an, and there were a terrible mix-up and anyway, Mac was really pretty upset with, forgot his name. Anyway, so there was the position for director was open. This position was made into a full-time position, but that was made into a full-time position before the director was not going. It was not had left. So when I came in '87, I came with Owen Hagen was going to be my supervisor. He was in College of Education, and he was going to be part-time College of Education, part-time director of Central CIS. Well, then the dean had a heart attack in education.
Yep, Ken Ames.
Yeah,
yep.
and so Owen was promoted. So Owen was shifted from that, and Sinking became my direct. Between the time I left Nankai in 1st of July, and by the time I got here, I was coming to work for Owen, but by the time I got here, I was working for Don Sinking. So anyway, so Don was the director of CIS, and also I think he was graduate director.
He had many roles at the end of his career, I think. Yeah.
My favorite story about him is he says, I don't know. He said, I've been almost. There's hardly any position that I haven't been in at SCSU, and I know what the distance, where the closest bathroom is to my office in every one of those positions. He said, I can tell you. So, anyway, Don was just a marvelous guy. So, and we brought Don to Nankai. He came back with that Wizard of Oz group, and Dorothy Simpson and Don Sinking and Dale Swanson and the director of theater at that time. I can't remember what his name is. Anyway, not good with names.
It's all right.
I should have made notes. Anyway, so but by the time Christmas came around, we had decided we were going to stay. This was working out fine.
Yeah. So what did you do though? What was?
Well, the thrust of my job really was to build the international student body, both in programming and also, but more importantly, was to figure out how to get more. And I told Mac that there is one way, and that's to spend some money. And he said, well, that's not the way we're going. And that was the end of that.
And so why did he want to recruit more? Was it financial partly? Was it to internationalize campus, to give other students experience with international students? I mean, yep. For him coming from Canada, what was his reasons for doing that?
Well, he sort of summed it up in two ways. He said two things have to happen here in order for us to stabilize enrollment, for one thing, and that's to have a group of students that we think we can manage and have some control over what the numbers are, because he said we're going to be faced with two serious problems. One is that the demographics are going to create a problem for us from time to time, and when they do, they create monstrous problems. The other problem is with the faculty. If we don't get international faculty on this campus, we're never going to be able to do it. Can't do it right. So he said, my job is to get international faculty. I want international faculty on this campus so that they understand how they can outreach and how they can grow this international atmosphere. And so you have to figure out how to get international students here. And after the second or third year, I said, there just is only one way, and that's to spend some money. Because you look around and that's how they're doing. Kun Lee in Mankato, that's how he does it. He makes trips. He goes to talk to people in Kuala Lumpur and Jakarta and wherever, and he talks to those schools. So those schools know who he is. So he said, you just got to spend some money. Well, he decided to spend a little money. Well, he didn't have much money. According to him, he didn't have much money. But then we started doing some serious recruiting. It didn't pay off very well. It paid off in that when I came, just before I came, there was a great influx of Iranians from the Shah of Iran period. And so when I came in, the stories about the Iranians and their expensive cars and all the casual relationship with money that they had, but that was really on a decline, and they could see it coming. So they were. So Mac was aware that is the nature of the enrollment problem with international students. So I recruited heavily in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And I thought in China. I said, there's the market. That is the market in China. But we've got to solve the problem of visas, because that was the really most difficult part. He wanted more Europeans. And after I had recruited in Europe, I said, there's just no hope. We don't have the right credentials for the Europeans. We can have friends from Denmark and a few from England, but there's nothing here for them. This isn't what the Vassar, William and Mary, those places all have all the right credentials. We don't. So we're going to have to work with Malaysia and maybe some other countries, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, countries that have money that can afford us, and we can do something for those kids that they can take back and get on with it. And that's what really grew out of it. And we were maintaining 200 to 300 for those early years. But then even then it started dropping off because the competition got terribly tough. Australia was giving out big opportunity packages. Our opportunity package of in-state tuition has always been the lifeblood of the state system here. Without that, we would be probably not much better off than Nebraska or South Dakota or North Dakota or wherever, because the fact that it's affordable within reason, because it doesn't take parents very long before they start comparing, and when they start comparing the difference in the costs, and tuition is meaningful to them. Room and board they don't understand, and the kids sort of work that out once they're here. But the tuition they can understand when they look at Stanford at $3,500 a semester, and St. Cloud at that time $1,500. It didn't take much. Anyway, so we just sort of went along, and then of course Mac was left. He resigned in '92 and died in '94. And then we had Bob Bess, and Bob Bess came in and was going to be here for a year and ended up here for 3 years. And Bob was good, and Bob had a vision, but he said to me, he said, I'm not here to create a new direction. I'm just here to hold the fort until they hire. and of course then we went through that hiring period, so there were all kinds of political, economic reasons. End result is that when Gruby came in with a vision. He had something in mind, and I wasn't going to be a part of it.
So at that point, you were the director of international studies.
Yeah.
Yep.
And as director, Gruby, I had a conference in Colorado, and I wanted to get permission to go to this conference, and he said yes. And while you're there, you stop off and visit with my friend at where he came from in Colorado, and he director of international programs, and I did, and I came back and I got the writing was on the wall. He had something in mind, and anyway, I don't know. But I know I wasn't. You're always at the discretion of the president. I learned that very early. And I've worked for some marvelous presidents. But I was 62. And the prospect of trying to hold myself together for until I was 65 made phased retirement attractive. And so I said we put together, Myron Nemirsky, Barb Groshek, and I put together a plan to make a phased retirement program. And we presented to Gruby that I would bring back, I would take from 300, under 300, to 1,000 in 2 years. That was the plan. And he thought that was a really good idea.
So, but what was his vision though?
I don't really know.
You're not really sure. So obviously, we were talking about President McDonald was very interested. Bob Best keeping the seat warm, but was interested. I know he was interested in South Africa. He was very involved with folks there, and but you were unsure about what President Gruby wanted you to do. So
yeah, it was never clear. It was never clear.
Do you think he had a vision? Do you have an idea, or was it just something that, maybe international students were not the way to go? I don't know.
I don't know either.
Just don't know.
I don't know either. I know that there were the atmosphere changed markedly, and it just seemed like time to do something, and that's something, going to the biting off that bullet, and believing that I could do it. I really thought I could do it, and I did it. We ended up with 1,100 students at the end of at 2000 when I retired.
Wow.
We had 1,200 students. 1,200 international students.
So when did you go on phased retirement?
1997.
So you were on phased retirement for 3 years. So you were traveling the world to recruit students. So where were you primarily traveling to attract students to St. Cloud State?
Well, again, I still marketed heavily in the Southeast Asia because there was money in Southeast Asia. I started marketing in China because there were doors opening. We had placed 5 students here at St. Cloud State from China, from Tianjin, from Nankai. The one student is now director of theater at University of British Columbia, UBC. He's director of Asian theater there. Stephen, he did his master's degree here in theater, and Rosalind Saibin Hung is the vice president of Ecolabs in the cities. She did her master's here in information media, and a doctorate at the University of Minnesota. Stephen did his doctorate at Penn State. So we had, and some other students, we had placed 3 other students here as well. Those students, one of them is married, has her doctorate too. She's in Indiana. Anyway, the point is that the idea was to raise the number of students, and they were able to maintain that pretty much, partly because of what I did. I didn't do what ended up to be their goose with the golden egg. That became Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. I recruited there briefly. I did India, and we had some students from India for a while, and then that they didn't follow up. You have to. Yeah, McDonald's are the best example. You don't sell hamburgers for unless you keep selling hamburgers. And you don't sell them unless you keep people having a reason to come to your shop instead of going to Burger King. So and it's a strategy, and you have to make friends, and you have to influence people, and if you don't, and sometimes that is dependent on things that you don't find in books or you don't think of as being significant. I had the advantage of being an old guy. And I profiled pretty well as an academic, and I could talk to parents. But you send a 35-year-old person out there that looks like a kid and talk to parents, they're not going to be, because if you look around who else is recruiting, most of them are older-looking gentlemen or ladies who fit the profile of an academic, so that they feel that there's an academic. This institution has got, and I've been criticized for saying this, but I think it's true. This institution has a problem because it has too strong of an athletic department. Well, most of the world is not interested in sending their kids to an athletic department. They want to send their kids to an academic institution. And we're so strong on hockey and football that it will always be a problem for St. Cloud. And the other problem is St. Cloud. St. Cloud. So until you can convince people otherwise by being able to wave other flags in such a way that those 2 flags don't create a problem, the recruiting can be done pretty successfully. And frankly, I think most parents send their kids to places where they have some degree of confidence in the person who represents, or who they believe the information that they're getting is the information they wanted to hear. And that's a tough road. You can't make that happen.
You got to work at it. It's not easy. Yeah, that's a nice analogy about McDonald's. I mean, you just can't just show up and say, this is the greatest thing ever, and then you disappear. You're like, what happened? Yeah. You need to cultivate those relationships. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, how many international students are there on campus now? About 1,500, I believe.
I don't know what the numbers are right now, but I know that what they have been doing has apparently been working. I think the disappointing thing, I am so pleased to have been here during a transition period from white cloud to multicolored cloud, and to have the multilingual. delighted to walk through the campus and hear the languages and see the clothing and see the attitudes and demonstration of these are kids doing something that they think is important. I've always been disappointed because I failed myself. I don't think I did as good a job as I should have done or could have done maybe, in that I never felt I was terribly successful at integrating the international students into the campus life.
It's one thing to bring them here. It's another to make them feel that they belong, that
That's
they do belong, and to get involved with the activities. I mean, that's why you go to college, right? It's not just the classroom; it's about everything else as well.
And we do a better job than most, I think. That we did a better job right from the early days. Even before I came, they were doing a good job. They did the international festival at Crossroads. And then I moved it out of Crossroads and brought it on campus. And my argument at that time to Don and to Mac was that we were missing an opportunity to introduce the international students to the other students on campus, and that somehow that would be a better device, that introducing it to the community, because the community saw it more like a zoo, going to see strange things, and then some of that rubs off in the community. Yes, and certainly it's not a waste, but if we brought it on campus, we might be able to make it stick. And the idea of the multicultural events taking place, many different ones during the year instead of one in the mall, I thought made a lot more sense, especially since the groups were getting more diverse in their representation. Their representation was getting to be, there were larger numbers of Japanese, of various different cultures, but still we don't do a good. Well, maybe we do. I shouldn't say we, because I'm not here, and I certainly don't have any responsibility for it. But integrating a foreign person into a culture is a tough road for both parties. We know we were New Zealanders. We were Chinese for almost 5.5 years. We were Chinese for 3+ years. We were New Zealanders, and they're breaking down the barriers and building relationships is it's a lot of work for both parties.
Yeah.
And no, the experience here, best job I ever had, and that's competing with China, and that was a wonderful job.
That's fantastic.
But it was the people. I mean, Barb Groshek has been absolutely a fantastic friend, and Art, and well, there's a long list of people.
Yeah,
a long list of people that have kept the home fires burning, and have built home fires that some people even purposely tried to put out and weren't very successful. And it's always been a problem trying to convince people that these kids are going to take a lot more away than we really understand or appreciate. I still see many students in China that were here, that came here and did degrees here. And there are many Chinese students that I are very close to and are still here in the U.S. Some of them getting green cards, some of them actually at the crossroads of making their decision about giving up their Chinese passport. And that's pretty rewarding.
Yeah, that's great. Well, before we end, let's talk just about one more thing. So I promised we'd get back to your wife, Rachel,
Good.
And your children. So you met Rachel here as undergraduate student. So how long? When did you marry your wife?
We were married in 1958 after really knowing each other for 6 weeks.
I think it worked out well for you. It's 61 years later, you're still married?
Yeah.
And how many children do you have?
We have 2 children, a boy and a girl. Our son is an executive in Colorado. He works all over the U.S. Basically an engineer. He didn't finish his degree here. As a matter of fact, he left without completing his degree. And we've had conversations about that. And I've concluded that he probably did the wise thing because he really got on with his life. And he's done very well. He worked for Zurich for a number of years, and then he's moved to Colorado. He loves Colorado. It's sort of his home away from home. And our daughter is here in St. Cloud, and her husband just now retiring from the Sauk Rapids school system. He's been an elementary school teacher for 25 years here, I suppose. I don't know how many years. I figured that one out. And our daughter works for Social Security, office.
How many grandchildren do you have?
We've been very unfortunate in that department. We have only 2 left. One died.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That was hard. And we as a family are still trying to recover from that. Our only granddaughter, she died. We have 3 great-grandchildren. And that's nice.
Yeah.
But, so family life for us is certainly not as extravagant as it might have been. But we have about 140 great-grandchildren. They're all Chinese.
Of course they are.
And so, we have a network of family in China, and a network, and some of that here in the States who are Chinese. So that's 35 years of plowing that ground, bound to yield some very wonderful fruit.
Fantastic. Well, Roland, we've been talking for a while.
Yeah, we have.
So is there anything else that you'd like to add before we end this interview?
Yeah, I'd like to say a couple of things. You know, I never thought I'd be 83. I couldn't imagine, actually, that I was going to be 50 and have my 50th birthday in China. That one was a surprise. And being an old man now, there are some real benefits. A coincidence, a serendipity, I guess you'd say. I've just worked out. I had this year, I'm celebrating my 65th high school class reunion in August. I got roped into being the chair for the thing, so I guess I really am celebrating, but I'll be celebrating much more after it's over. But so in August I'm going to be a 65th class reunion, high school class reunion. In September it's St. Cloud State's 150th class reunion. And in October I'm going back to China for my last trip to China for its 100th. Nankai is celebrating its 100th anniversary. And that's really kind of remarkable to be able to do that, you know.
Been around a long time.
Yeah. And to be able to be at 3 birthday parties.
You're right.
It's pretty remarkable and really kind of special. And that's probably a good way to end this interview. So happy birthday.
Yes, happy birthday, Roland, for all of those things. And thank you for your time and your service to this university. And what an incredible story that you have with all the places that you've lived and done. I couldn't even imagine the adventures that you and your wife and your children had over those years. So
lots of stories.
Lots of stories. So I thank you for your time today for this interview, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks, Roland.
Appreciate it.
All right.